Good afternoon. The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Unfortunately, we don't have a quorum, but I'd like to thank my colleagues, Senator Barnett, Senator Perez, and Senator Duenas, and also Senator Canata and Senator Tina Munoz Barnes that are present. Thank you. Yes, I recognize you. Thank you. We will stay. Yes, Senator Barnes, Vice Speaker Barnes. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Guåhan. Once we meet quorum, then we will continue on with where we left off. Thank you. We'll stay in recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We do have a quorum at this time. We'll begin our Chapter 5, Section 1. On this chapter, we'll generally basically be going by page, okay? Because pretty much each page in Chapter 5 is a different section. And if you all will follow along, we'll just move along with this. And when I close the section, it'll identify everything in that section. But we'll begin with Section 1, which actually just jumps into page 2. All right, colleagues? And we do have an amendment proffered by our speaker. And Madam Speaker, you may now address your amendment on page 50, which is Section 1, but page 50. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, point of information, is that where the appropriation of $6,145,249?
That's correct. And the reason why is because page 1A is just the beginning of Chapter 5, and page 2 would be, or page 50 would be as we move along. Okay?
Mr. Chair, may I be provided with a copy of the amendment?
Okay, let's go back to recess while we make sure everybody's got a copy of the amendments. Thank you. We'll return to recess. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We will now begin with the first section of Chapter 5. Reminder, when I gavel in for the next section, I will close the last section or the page. And the reason I say that is because, very good example, on page 49 is section 1. It talks about Chapter 5. But page 50 is where there's an amendment. And there may be another amendment on page 51. So I'll end up, when I close the page, it's referring to the agency in that page. So we have an understanding. In the previous chapters, we were going by part and by section and by chapter. Now we're in an area where numerous numbers of agencies are here. So we'd have to go by page, which covers the agency. Okay, and then when I open up the section or the agency, I'll tell you which one we're opening up. And once we open, please be reminded, there will be no more amendments. Now, at the same token, you can bookmark that page until the end of Chapter 5. Then we'll go back. Okay? Everybody's have an understanding. We're good to go. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, you have an amendment on page 50. Ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment would add the words, a subsection 2 to this subsection A, which would say the appropriation to the Office of the Governor in Part 1 of Section 1, subsection A, shall not be effective until the funds appropriated in Public Law 37.5 are deposited to the Guam Department of Education. This is just consistent with previous amendment to ensure that the funds in Public Law 37.5 carry over to FY2024 until DOE can get those funds, because we heard an announcement, although we can't find any documents, that the funds that were appropriated to DOE, the $20 million by Public Law 37.5, were taken and used for the executive branch instead. And we also heard from DOE that they are in critical need, and that if they don't get this money, they will not be able to certify funds to hire personnel that they believe they need to hire during FY24, or they will have to choose between hiring or paying, power, water, telephone, and the other critical needs of the agency. So as they testified, they have allocated all their ARP funds to CIP projects pretty much, and they have allocated their budgets for personnel and for part of the utilities. But this money they had previously planned to use for the critical repairs and maintenance that needs to be done, as well as some hiring in the facilities and maintenance section of DOE in order to continue work that was not going to be covered by the ARP. So I believe that their need continues to be critical. And I know this is kind of a drastic measure, but I just feel like we need to do something drastic when it comes to DOE. I want to hear an end to the excuses that, we've heard over many, many years. And the biggest one was not enough funds. And then secondly, right, that now they're not getting the funds that are appropriated. So if we could just end that, then we can see for real. If DOE's management can get its act together and get these schools safe and continue to do the maintenance that is necessary. And I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that as soon as possible. I think of course, I know all of you agree that the children deserve that. And so I realize this is kind of drastic, but I'm hoping it sends the message that give them that money. And we're sitting on excess funds. I don't think we need to take it out of Guam Department of Education to take care of typhoon repair across the government of Guam. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does anyone like to speak to that amendment? Does anyone want to speak? Senator Barnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Totally support this amendment. I think it's shameful how we're having to run all around town trying to get this $20 million back for our public schools and our public school students. It's also shameful that we pass a law that gives the Guam Department of Education $20 million, and then that $20 million can be taken away like a thief in the night. And it's been said on the record numerous times. We've heard it from just about everybody at the Guam Department of Education that not only did they have plans for that $20 million, but that they want it back. And I know that the superintendent is meeting with the governor tomorrow, and I know that he intends to say as much over at Adelup. And they're pretty comfortable over there in their newly renovated offices while we're sending our kids to schools that we don't even care if they get inspected by public health. So yes, they should definitely pay up that 20 mil before they get their money to do whatever it is they're going to do with it. Let's get the band together one more time and support this amendment and really send us a strong message that when this body gives money and puts it where it's needed, that we're not going to support it being taken away and thrown down some rabbit hole where GDOE now has to jump through all these different hoops and kiss rings and to what? To get in line. And they got nothing to show for this $20 million. They said as much here in Committee of the Whole. What they got to show for this $20 million is a list of D-Land tickets that aren't getting addressed. It'd be a totally different story if they took the $20 million and, helped fix the schools and got everything ready for next Wednesday. But again, while our kids are going into schools that aren't safe, that don't require a public health inspection, because this body decided to do a 180-degree turn, they're sitting pretty over there with $10,000 raises and newly renovated offices. So let's put our foot down on this and not show them the money until they show GDOE the money. Por favor, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. Senator Dueñas, Senator Tello first, you raised your hand. Oh, okay, Senator Dueñas.
Mr. Chairman, and I certainly rise in support of the amendment. As a matter of fact, we've gone over the last couple of days trying to find money, and I'll remind our colleagues that on the first introduction of the bill, it was $30 million. But we haggled and decided it might be a little tight on the pay raises, so there was a compromise, and it was brought down to $20 million. That's the record, Mr. Chairman. Could have been $30 million, but it's $20 million, and it's still $20 million that absolutely needs to be there. I agree. I agree that from the day that that bill passed, and from the day that Department of Administration came down here and put it on the record months ago that they had transferred that money under oath, turned out to be that the money was not transferred and has never been transferred. And now, unfortunately, has been identified as recovery money. All the while, it is true, we continue to track positive cash flow. So I do agree, and I don't see any reason why the administration, the executive office, would not want to do that as well. And so I think it's a good amendment. It definitely puts teeth in the appropriation, and I agree with it, and I hope the body will vote in favor of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a shame that we have to be so extreme when it comes to doing something that this body has voted on to pass. what's even worse is that, supposedly she even signed it. And for not to fulfill that obligation, Mr. Chair, puts us where we are right now and putting an amendment like this through. So I stand in full support of this amendment. And I really think, for them to bluntly, obviously take that money and put it in what they call an account and add another $8 million in there for people with vouchers to go into that account to pay for, a typhoon recovery. And when I clearly asked Lester, that $20 million is open for anybody? Remember in this SES meeting that we had, the $20 million that you took plus an additional $8 million, which was a reimbursement from FEMA, was put in this account. So I was really surprised that they would take this money and use it for something else other than what it was intended for our children. Where's the priority there? So, Mr. Chair, I ask my colleagues, it's as simple as you need to pay what you agreed to sign into law, and that what this body all agreed to. So unfortunately, an amendment like this is putting feet to the fire, and we need to do this. So I ask my colleagues again, please, think of the children. Think of them. And this is something we all thought about months ago in passing the legislation. So let's not drop the ball, because that's exactly what happened. The ball was dropped and the money was used for something else. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Madam Vice Speaker.
Okay, Mr. Chair, let me be the bad guy here. Not even 2 hours ago, we talked about a separation of powers. The judiciary, the legislature, and the administration, and literally having the respect for each equal branch of government. As I look at this amendment, not that I don't want DOE to have the $20 million they should have had, but not even 2 or 3 days ago, we talked about an issue of taking $100,000 away from a program that the Youth Congress and the Bureau of Women's Affairs worked so hard for, to find out that during our heated discussion that there was an invoice from the Department of Education who just literally put on August 15th to purchase those menstrual products for the women and the students. And then we look at this, and we're blaming the administration for something that the Department of Education has a board of directors for. I don't get it. We just had a typhoon. We just had to be able to give and try and work together. We just talked about respecting each equal branch of government, and now we're going to do this? Maybe I'm going to ask something civil. Maybe ask the Office of Finance and Budget, and not to put anybody on the spot, but what would that impact be for the administration, who literally, legislature creates the policy, executive branch executes. But we have an agency, the Department of Education, who literally we gave some autonomy to because they have a board of education to take care of those things that you, Mr. Chair, were a part of, and you understand that process. So please, with all due respect, if I can ask the Office of Finance and Budget what impact that would have to the administration, because that's not showing any respect. 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Thank you. Steve Olby.
Yes, Senator. Once the bill was passed for FY24, appropriations are made to the various departments and agencies, including that of the governor and lieutenant governor. My interpretation of the proposed bill says the appropriation will stay intact, but it's more or less the allotment. They will not be able to spend accordingly. So that being said, again, in government, nothing happens or no expenditures incur without an allotment. So the way I'm reading it, come October 1st, the governor's office is basically shut down because they will not be authorized to spend any money because they're not allotted no funds from their appropriation in the law. That's my take, and I'm just offering, and that's the impact I think this will have, because you're restricting the use of the appropriation, which is normally allocated over a 12-month period, that appropriation will not be available to the governor's office to be expended. And that's the impact this will have.
So literally, that means we would be micromanaging the utilization of what the executive branch has to do when going through the process of facilitating this through, knowing that there is a Board of Education in place to deal with a lot of these issues and matters. Am I correct?
I think by law, because she is elected as the governor of Guam, she can probably continue the role of the governor. She would just not be able to do it out of the governor's office because
but
there
point of
are
inquiry,
no expenses.
Mr. Steve, but if they gave the $20 million back to GDOE, they could continue and get paid and everybody be happy, right?
No, Senator Barnett, I know what you're trying to get at, but let's just stick with what she's asking, what's going to happen. Because if the amendment was to pass, when you shut down an office, it doesn't matter if you give it the $20 million. It doesn't come back. I mean, it's not like it's going to happen overnight. So that's why Steve was trying to explain that based on the allotment, the office closes. You can't operate. That means you're never going to get the money moving. So it's kind of like, let it happen, then push for it from there. Then we can come back in and we can take a look at it again. But Steve, continue, please. I know where you come from, Senator.
Again, I'm only responding to the question. A lot of things can happen between now and October 1st, and that's beyond me. But answering the question is, that's my take. Well, that would be the repercussion of the bill, in my eyes.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I know I have 2 minutes, but the other question was, didn't we have an emergency session not too long ago where this August body had approved to allow the governor, based on the circumstances and the criticalness that this island was going through to try and recover, to authorize her to take $50 million from anywhere? Isn't that a true statement?
Yes, it was.
Okay. So you know what? We can't say we're going to allow you one hand, and then on the other hand, say no more until you do this. What are we trying to threaten here or do? Mr. Chair, I just bring this up, asking what the impacts are, and literally respecting what was even mentioned a couple of hours ago about respecting the three co-equal branches of government. So I have concerns about this amendment, with all due respect. This is not good for the government of Guam as a whole. And not that I don't want to give the $20 million back, because if we could find it and give it back based on what we've already authorized, then I would do that. But not this way. This is having no respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice. Anyone else would like to speak to the amendment? Oh, thank you, Senator Brown. Join the crowd. Thank you. Senator Brown.
Well, I have to say this is an interesting moment. You know, the legislature is it's ready for war. I don't have a problem. I'm always ready if a need is there. I don't have a problem standing my ground. I'm pretty consistent about that. But I have to say, you know, we allowed the administration to continue to spend federal money without really accounting for it. They pretty much ran their own show down there and pretty much ignored the legislature. And that's why in the last two budgets, I've always brought up the concern. It's very hard for us to budget for the government of Guam when we really don't know how all this federal money, unprecedented in the history of Guam, no governor's ever had this much money provided by the federal government for them to use. And there was nothing, it was silence. There were crickets here in the hole. And budgets were passed without taking into consideration how that money was spent, or even was it being spent on the priority needs of the pandemic and our recovery efforts. So it's very interesting. I mean, certainly, I could vote for it. I hope we're ready probably for line item vetoes on sections of this budget. Hopefully you have the votes to override it, because we've been down this road before. We went down this road with Carl Gutierrez. We cut his budget. He cut ours. And that budget cut stood because members of the body said, okay, we'll eat it. So think about it. I mean, I don't mind. I don't have much to lose in this game personally here. But as a policy position, I mean, I think it sends a very bold message, but I mean, you have to be prepared to live with the consequences, and the consequences are going to be that. Do you have the votes to override line item vetoes? Because I'm sure one of the first things the governor will do, at least in the case of Governor Gutierrez, is he cut the legislative budget. Can you override that? Can you override any other line item that's included in this budget? Do you have the votes to do that? So think about it, because those are the consequences that probably will, result from doing this action. I understand the frustration with the administration, their priorities. To me, I'm sorry, I'm here because of that. That's why I ran again, because I was very disappointed. I will reiterate again, in the direction of leadership. That's the only reason I'm here, after 14 years of living a more comfortable life, is because I was highly disappointed with the leadership direction. I see too much being put on the table and taken off the table for only a select members of this community, while everybody else is left outside. And I just don't think that's leadership. And the lack of accounting, I mean, they come up here, they're directors, and have very interesting responses for very direct questions about how the finances of this government are being spent. I've often said, because you have the power, you shouldn't abuse that power just because you have it. More the reason to be responsible with it because you have it for that time. So I don't know, I'll vote, maybe I will, maybe I won't. But for those of you that are supporting this initiative and sponsoring this initiative, I mean, as long as you're ready for the consequences, think about it, because I don't know that you're going to have all the votes, either to pass it. Will this budget pass? Will this budget get vetoed? And if the budget gets vetoed, are the votes there to override it? So there's a lot of implications with regards to this. And I have no love for the administration. That has never changed. I'm very disappointed with their leadership. I'm very disappointed. I expected more, I expected better. But that's not where we're at. So interesting to see how this goes. But I have no problem supporting education, but I just think you just need to be prepared for the consequences, because there will be consequences. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Anyone else would like to speak? Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tell you, not too far in distant past, did we, enjoy throwing money here, giving money there. That we also, we put out press releases and ads. We're out of the woods. We've got the money. We can do this. We can do that. And then we come into a budget which, understandably, is a whole lot more. And we find it difficult to be able to fund things because we spent more than we got. I'm in a situation, I agree with what everybody has said about this amendment, both for and against. And it's sad when we have to go now to the extreme measures that we're going so that we can get these services and we can do the things that the people of Guam need for us to do with the money we supposedly have. It's sad that it's necessary to do that now. You know, and when it comes down to it, as the retiring speaker from Pago Bay had stated, we choose to go one way or the other, we better get ready because we're going to war. We're at war. I'm willing to fight that war, in that war. Because let's go back to what we're trying to do here and being able to move, $20 million. Goes back to a conversation. If, that's a he said, she said, he did, she did, they forgot to do, they didn't do. And if you pull back on all the layers of how we got to it, you'll be surprised at how it started. I don't want to say surprised. So I'm just going to listen more to hear the arguments. Is this necessary? Maybe it is. Can there be another way? Maybe there is. But just remember how we got here, because this is just the start of many things to come. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Very welcome, Minority Leader Senator Blas. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment? Mr. Chairman, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Being the chairman of Appropriation and being also the former board chairman of the Department of Education, Guam Education Board, I've always fought for DOE, and in the past I've always tried to figure out a way out. Why doesn't the legislature help DOE? That's why I ran for the board then. And I became the chairman, and I would always fight for DOE. But when I got into the legislature, in the past, they say maybe 2 or maybe 3 years in the budget, it always puzzled me how DOE always says we're short, we're short, we're short. You can't be short because you have a lump sum. It's all in management. Then I'd always ask the Office of Finance Budget, which is right next to me, where are we truly at with DOE? He would respond to me, "Hi, surplus. They have leftover money. They're not hiring everybody because why? There's nobody to hire." Folks, I mentioned this earlier in our budget. 3 years ago, or maybe 4, or less than 4, we had a COVID. DOE received $287 million, ended up with $237. Take a look at the record of how they spend the money. Did they fix the schools that we are now barking that they need to fix? No. Here, we had an acting superintendent. We had 2 of them. We have now a current superintendent being sued. But if we look at the record of what DOE has been doing, as much as we want to, it's for the children. Everyone's going to speak. It's for the children. It's about management, DOE. How they manage their money. They get lump sum. Now we're going to say, shut down the governor's office until they give the $20 million. Statement made was that then the acting superintendent gave the approval. Sure, we're all looking for documents. We haven't seen one yet. but supposedly they took it. Why? Because to help part of the recovery of the typhoon. Why? Because the bill we passed was that 50 million take from any general fund that's available. 20 million happened to be part of that 50. Supposedly. 28 million. Let's do the numbers, folks. I'm not going to say I'm not going to fight for the children. I'll fight for the children once management in DOE starts doing their job. You say you need to clean the school, then clean the school, because you know what? I like it. Last week or a month ago, folks were sharing this on the floor that, hey, we got a picture that GW is asking for help. My wife is alumni at GW. She got that, and we try to help them. But we kept moving on. So basically, on the issue of this amendment, I can't support this. We need to go after DOE first and find out where they're at. Where they're at, because out of whatever amount of money we give them, they get 50, maybe 60 million in federal money. And even that's going to court, because I think one of our colleagues is suing one of them for the overtime. So my only concern is I can't support shutting down an office, especially the executive branch. Because like one of our colleagues said, that are we ready for the war? Are we ready to try to figure out to get the number to vote on a line item veto? I don't believe we need to do that. We just need to vote accordingly and object accordingly, and then we can move on from there. But I do object to this amendment. I can't support this amendment. And I thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator San Augustine. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on the amendment in front of us? Okay, Senator Jesse Lujan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I too, as previous esteemed colleagues had mentioned, I'm ready for a fight. But I think there's a company that says, just do it. But are you ready? Are you ready? You know, this is an exercise of course, the balance of power. But as my esteemed colleague from Chalampago had said, that balance will only come if we have 10 to a possible override. Do we have that? Are you ready? And so, again, nobody's going to argue in the sense that we don't want to support the kids. We all do. We have all voted almost every single bill in regards to helping the Department of Education. But this entails, again, a bigger fight. And we anticipate that to happen. And do we have the numbers to outfight the one? Because in regards to the balance of powers, we need 10 in this side to battle that one veto vote, or veto override. So again, we go down this road. Are we just going to do it? And are we ready? With that, Mr. Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. Ma'am? Anyone else like to speak? Senator Duenas, Nicholas?
Normally when I'm about to do something fun, I would try to say, I would think about what my dad would think. In this case, he'll probably say, Alfredo Babailun Mizu. This amendment, you know, it's not fair. First of all, we went ahead and we gave 20 million to DOE, and now we want to pull out our weapon and put a gun to their head and say, no, if you don't do this first, then this is not going to happen. And I think this amendment would greatly impact the government in a negative way. And I can't see any reason why I'd support this measure, this amendment. So I think I don't support the amendment. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
Chair.
Nicholas. I'm just looking across here if there's anyone else to speak. And I'll look to my right. Anyone else like to speak? Otherwise, I'm going to ask the speaker to close on her amendment. There being none, and then I'll ask for the vote. Objects. I know there's an objection, so. Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to my colleagues for the debate on this. And I just want to address a couple of these points. First of all, I don't want to fight. I don't think we need, as a government, to be fighting over DOE, whether they have bad management or good management. When we decided to give them the $20 million, we decided, good or bad, they need it. We want to call them on it. We want to call them on the repairs that are needed, and we want them done. We don't want to go even one more year with an additional excuses from GDOE that they don't have money to make the repairs, that they don't have money to put the toilet paper in the bathrooms. Very, very real problems. And one of my colleagues is correct. And then we had a typhoon, and we said, in very good faith, that was my bill, told the governor, take anywhere you want, $50 million, a huge amount of money, because she said that's what she needed immediately. And we responded immediately in good faith. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine there would be a governor that would say the only place we're going to get that money is from Guam Department of Education, who was struggling at that point, even before the storm, to get sanitary permits to open the schools. So anybody in here who wants to tell me, oh, how rude we are, or how we have no respect. Respect would have been, we respect those teachers and parents who are sweating out there and putting in their own money to open a school that is not fit. And we can go on and on about the years of mismanagement of DOE. Yes. And the lack of whatever from their board, yes, go ahead. But that doesn't help. What helps is give them the money. Take away every excuse that they have, which we have done. We've given them money. We have given them procurement authority. We've given them everything in the book. We have tried to give it to them until the governor takes it away. And I want to be respectful. And if that money is replaced, we can always pull this out of the budget. And in fact, this doesn't even take effect until October 1st. We have the entire month of September to make things right. But it's actually too late in September even, because the schools need to open in August. And we have 15 days left in August to make things right. Well, what we don't have is the days prior to opening of the school to get this money back in there and used immediately, because even if they probably got their mold mitigation, it's not going to complete 41 schools at this point. So that's the harm. And for me, that's the lack of respect. And I don't want to fight. But God forbid that we're fighting over whether the governor's office, not the entire executive branch, but whether the governor's office gets a budget or the legislature gets line item vetoed. But no, what about they took the money from the Guam Department of Education? Just focus on that. And if they want to be so petty as to line item veto the legislature, but what I very much disagree. I'm telling you, yes, I'm looking for drastic measures. I am trying to be creative because the respectful ways that we have approached this did not work. We still have teachers and parents out there stressed to the top. Trying to decide, literally, whether they're going to send their kid into that school or not. And until we give the Department of Education everything that they could have possibly needed, and they came in here and told us their budget's $30 million short, whether you like what they said or you don't like what they said, that's what they said. And that will be their excuse. So if we want to wipe those excuses out, I say give them everything. Give it to them. Give it to them now. The governor only spent $5.9 million on typhoon repairs so far from the typhoon reports, maybe more.
Madam
She's
Speaker.
only setting aside 28, and we've got 11 million in excess from this year and many millions of excess from previous years in the general fund. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now we'll move to the vote. There is an objection. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Okay. Amendment passed. Colleagues, there's no other amendments in this on this page. What's the next amendment? What page? Okay, no, what page? 62, right? All right, we are now on page 51. There are no amendments on page 51. No comments. 52. No comments. 53. No comments. 54. Folks, as I call the page, I am closing it immediately, okay? So don't be crying. Pay attention to where we're at.
53.
We are already on page 54, Guam Office of Veterans Affairs. Folks, pay attention.
You're too fast.
Excuse
Nope,
me, Mr.
nope,
Chair.
it's just a matter of listening.
Wait, Mr. Chair. We just left page, what?
Senator Tello, the only other amendments that exist is on page 62. So all these other pages, there's no amendments.
Oh, okay, but at
So
least...
that's why I'm just going through it.
You know, in past budget hearings, Mr. Chair, you've always been gracious to go through each page
I'm still
and
being
then look at it, even though there is not an amendment, in case anybody had any comments on that particular agency. So I was hoping you would do the same thing. For instance, anybody have any comments on decolonization? Anybody have any comments on ancestral lands?
Understood. Senator Tello,
Yeah.
while we finished page 50, everybody was busy thinking of everything else but where we're at. Stay in the business, okay? We're now closed page 50. Okay, we're now on 51. Are there any comments? There being none? Closed. 51 is closed. We are now on page, because 51 is for 52. Page 54. Office of Veterans Affairs. Are there any comments for Veterans Affairs? Because there's no amendments.
53.
Or correction, 53. Land, see? The pages are stuck to each other. Guam Ancestral Land Commission. Any? Ekung fan ekung ka basta commando sa tiga kandus tinawego. Ready? Page 53.
If the
On page 53, do you have any comments? Because
no,
there's no
I
amendments.
don't. Thank you.
All right. On page, that's closed. Page 54, Guam Office of Veterans Affairs. Are there any comments? Because there are no amendments that will be accepted. Madam Speaker, you have any comments for page 54?
No, but I want to just comment that this was an increase, it looks like, of 26.4%, a bigger increase than many of the other agencies. But I'm happy to see it because it's for the Office of Veterans Affairs. And I guess I just want to ask OFB, how do you see this money being spent? Is this only for salaries, or is this to accomplish some other projects for the Office of Veterans Affairs?
Yes, portion of the increase, Senator, is for the 22%.
Oh.
And I think there are a couple of contractual services that we funded for them. What made, and I'll just comment, and this was brought up to my attention. In the case of Veterans Affairs, I believe there's a total of 6 FTEs, classified positions, within Office of Veterans Affairs. And I also believe there's, I think, 10 limited term employees under Office of Veterans Affairs. Those 10 positions are not funded by the general fund, they're funded from other sources. For some reason not known to me even today, is those 10 positions weren't funded or weren't requested for the FY2024 in the FY24 budget. And so it's like many other positions in Guam that are not funded out of the general fund, and that is funded from other sources. So the weird thing about this is that those 10 positions are basically the maintenance people over at Veterans Affairs Office, and they're the ones that actually do all the servicing. And my question to them was, and they were asking if the general fund can assume the funding of these positions because they were kind of like terminating it in FY24. And I told them, I said, if it's not in your request, officially it's not being requested. But yes, I think you have a very serious problem. How do you address the funding for these 10 positions when they're actually your maintenance workers at the cemetery? But for in FY24, we did not fund those 10 positions.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. Yeah, that's pretty serious. I'd like to see us help them out as much as we can to increase their services or their ability for that, and not just to cover the raises and the salaries. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we are now closed. Guam Office of Veterans Affairs, page 54. Oh, Senator Blas, did you have a comment for 54?
No, but I would request, Mr. Chair, that henceforth, and I appreciate the conversation that was had between the OFB chair and the speaker, is if there is a possibility, first off, I know that a lot of this is lump sum and there's really not a whole lot of information as to how this money is going to be spent. That said, though, is recognizing that basically over the 3 years, the last 3 years, there have been hiring that's been done in this government through federal sources and everything. And, granted that the money was available through the federal funds to be able to do some of the hiring and to provide some of the services, I think that the body would appreciate if in the breakdown of the summaries henceforth, if in the agency budgets to be considered, was there any hiring as a result of use of federal funds or using federal funds and then now brought all over to general fund, or are there any services that were started with federal funds and now we have to fund it in general fund?
So that question is posed to OFB?
Yes, or
okay,
is there a way to
we
be
can
able to do
answer.
that?
Yes, Senator. In OFB's budget discussion with the agencies, we asked basically that question. Are there any positions or any expenditures right now that are being funded by a federal grant that is going to be absorbed by the general fund? For most of them, the only ones they were actually divulged to us that they were actually in personnel. There were no, I don't recall anything like under the other categories, but for personnel is the only one I can recall that they were asking to transfer the funding from federal sources or non-general fund funds, from federal funds or not general fund to the general fund.
And I bring this up, Mr. Chair, because they were brought on for specific purposes, whether it be as a result of the pandemic or as a result of, the other calamities that we have to do with. And in most cases, because it was necessary, these individuals didn't go through the merit system. Okay, didn't go to the same system that we expect from our our government employees. And then now for us to have to pick this up because now their federal funding has run out and now we're going to have to pick up a general fund, when that position didn't exist to begin with, and we're going to fund this, I have some serious concerns with that. I'm not saying that they should or they shouldn't be picked up, but that's not what this was for. So I know it's going to be a little extra tedious in the process, but I would appreciate, and I'm sure the body would appreciate, that henceforth, while we move on, and we're going to move pretty quickly, I'm sure, is the funding that is going to be going to these entities, any of this funding going to be so that because to fund positions or services that were initially federally funded or funded through some type of program, and now we're going to try to attempt to bring them over into the general fund and not have to go through the same processes. We'll be very clear with that.
Thank you, Senator Barros, but we also need to understand that if you wanted to talk classified, there's an application process. If you want to talk unclassified or limited term, I kind of see where you're coming from. But when you talk classified, it's very, I would say it would be very dangerous to assume that people are being picked up. Maybe 30 years ago that happened in Guam. I know that. You and I both know that. But it's not happening today. Now, limited term and unclassified, I can see where you come from.
Yes, and that's where you know, again, when we're talking about the merit system, these are the classified employees. Okay?
The folks he's talked about, Steve brought up, was if they were federally funded and it's expiring, I think the question would be, are they LTAs or unclassified? And if once we clarify that, then I agree with what you're saying. We need to know who they are, or not necessarily the person, but what positions are there, so we can come to terms with exactly what's going on.
Yes.
Only because I'm a veteran, and I hold that very tight, close to me. To help the Veterans Affairs.
Okay. But you know, I mean, I didn't bring this in the context of the Veterans Affairs. I thank the conversation that we had with that, but now it just brings up the concern for the other agencies, okay? So that's why I bring that up.
Okay, so as we move along, if OB, I don't know if they can identify that, if they're I doubt they can identify if they're limited term or unclassified.
Then for the purposes of this discussion, because this is a huge chapter, and almost all of these agencies are in a huge chapter, as we go through, if you can't get it now, bookmark it so that we can go back and make sure that, okay, based on this, there's none. Okay, move. Based on this.
There's a lot of chapters, so somebody has to claim you want to bookmark it for that reason. Otherwise,
yes,
we're going to move. So what are you bookmarking? Because we're done with 53.
We're going to bookmark the whole thing.
54.
Unless Steve can, what's the next agency that we're going to be talking about? BBMR?
BBMR.
Can Steve tell me if there's any of those positions or any of those programs within his agency that fit that category of concern that I have?
For BBMR, no.
Okay. That's all I need.
Okay, so that would complete page 54 or correction 55. All right? Now we're on page 56. If Steve can make a statement, if it falls under the category that Senator Blas asked. Steve, civil service? Yeah.
Senator, to your question, for civil service, the answer is no.
Okay. Civil service, this comment is if any of them fall under that they were federally funded and moved to the classified, unclassified, or LTA. That was his issues. Other than that, he said that no, none of them fall under the category. Okay, so civil service, that's the area I cover. But anyway, yes,
could I just ask if, while we go through these executive branch agencies,
we're on page 56.
Yes, if my question would be, are these is this increase, they're all increased, are they funding just the increases in salaries, or is there anything new? And if you could, while we go through, just point that out, please.
Yes, Senator. One of the things that we made sure that it covers is that all government Guam agencies, especially line agencies, had sufficient funding to pay for the GPP. Other increases can be contributed to increases in increments, adjustments in rates, increases in contractual services, utilities, what have you. But for the most part, yes, the GPP, I can safely say that all departments and agencies, line agencies, departments and agencies were actually covered for GPP costs.
All right, Speaker?
Thank you.
Okay. Page 56 is now closed. We are now on the DOA. Page 57, which leads all the way to page 61. The same question is posed to OEB. Do you know, and maybe OEB can also answer the increases because of the following reasons, like what the Speaker asked, so we can generalize it and we can move on this. Steve, if you can.
Yes, Senator Blas, the answer to your question is no.
And will the Speaker increase?
Oh,
In other words, there's a $2 million increase for the Department of Administration. If you could just tell us why.
yeah, the majority of that, Senator, is for the GPP, which is almost close to about $2 million.
Okay. Page 57 to page... Senator Blas, yes.
No, thank you, sir. Just so that we can get a full understanding, any monies that come into the government for any reason whatsoever should be identified in this budget. Is this correct?
Can you repeat your question, sir?
Any monies that come into this government, okay, should be either discussed or identified in this budget. Is this correct?
If you're referring to revenue, Senator,
Yeah.
all revenues given to the to the government of Guam should be recorded Department of Administration. That's correct.
Right. Okay. This doesn't include all basically proposals or all expenditures, the way they're going to, they intend to expend it, should be also discussed in this budget. Maybe not in specificity, but at least that's what we would find in this budget.
You're correct, Senator, but again, I would think that all the expenditures incurred in the government of Guam basically has the appropriate appropriation
Understood.
to cover those expenditures.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, okay. And I bring this up, Mr. Chair, because as I'm looking at the Department of Administration budget, and in review, again, I went back and did a cursory review of the revenue. I don't see anywhere here where there was any discussion. I don't, Steve and I, we had this discussion about funding, where they were to put the funds to. But I don't see any discussion here of where they put the money for the self-insurance, for the pharmaceutical prescription drug, or for the dental programs that we had. That it was run out of the Department of Administration.
Okay, I need to understand your question first, Senator. Are you asking whether or not there's an appropriation made for this so-called self-insurance program that you're referring to?
Whether there was an appropriation or whether there's any program that existed for that. Where was that discussed in the budget? If not in DOA, because DOA apparently is the, how would you say this? I guess the agency entity in charge of the self-insurance program. Where is it delineated, or where is it discussed in their budget?
In the conversation with DOA when we had our budget meetings with them, it was revealed to us that the government is planning to do a self-insured for medical portion of
I'm not worried about the medical. Okay? Yeah. I'm worried right now that what exists.
Yes.
Okay? The prescription drug and the dental.
Yes.
That's what okay? Sayang the medical.
The only appropriation, sir, I can maybe refer to in terms of the self-insurance thing is that there is an appropriation in the miscellaneous appropriation made to the Department of Administration that will cover the costs of Guam retirees in the amount, I believe, of $39.9 million. which is, I believe, supposed to cover the retiree share of this program. As far as the actives is concerned, is that in every department staffing pattern, there is a allocation within the staffing pattern that shows the employee's contribution to medical, life, and dental costs.
Okay.
I mean, the government's contribution. Okay? So that is the only amount of money that I know that is being allocated to, I'm assuming that will be utilized to cover the cost of the self-insured by Guam.
But where does it go?
Are you talking about the deductions from the employees and stuff?
And then the retiree, we gave $35 million last year, right? Where did it go?
The appropriation is made in the Budget Act. It's approved in the Budget Act, and once it's appropriated in the Budget Act, it's, I assume, deposited in an account with Department of Administration. The same thing with the deductions for the employee share. I assume that, not assume, but I know that any collections made from those categories are also deposited into an account at Department of Administration.
So it is Department of Administration.
I can't think of any other department that would be monitoring.
Okay,
these
thanks,
funds.
because then it just threw everything that Mr. Byrne has been telling the community as to where that money was going. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That's my own opinion, okay? I'm not saying that's what you asked me where it is. I'm just telling you, I'm assuming that that's where the money is being deposited.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we've looked over DOA from page 57 to 62, 61. Did you want something? Because you had your hand up before I saw
Yes.
Senator.
Yeah.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
And then you'll be followed by Senator Dueñas.
I wanted to, so there was a $2 million appropriation on the general fund in the part one of this section yet to DOA, but then in on section 14 or under page 61, there's a new $8 million appropriation again to DOA, and this one is for the Financial Management Information System, and it says it's for the second year term of the contract. Can you just explain this? And we didn't line item fund the first year term. They paid it out of their existing budget?
Yes, Senator, the information I was told, again, during Department of Administration's budget meeting with us at OOP is that they are instituting this new FMIS system in the government of Guam. The system is being handled and managed by Department of Administration. It is a 5-year contract with the vendor that has already been chosen, and it's over the course of 5 years. The first year funding, I believe, in the amount of, I think, $10.9 million was funded by 4 separate federal funds. I believe a portion of that also was ARP, can be mistaken. So no general fund, no local monies were used to pay for the first year contract of that 5-year contract, which starts in FY23. In FY24, I'm assuming that those funding sources are no longer available because they are requesting for the amount to cover the cost of the second year contract in the amount of $8.4 million. I'm just going to note something because, you know, the contract is available, it's out there, and it indicates like for the second year it was something like around 10.7 million. But in my conversation with Director Burns from administration, he indicated that that amount was adjusted simply because they made some adjustments in the contract servicing. So it's no longer 10 million, it was dropped down to 8.4.
All right, yeah, I'm curious that they procured that without the funding, and now every year they're looking for the funding. Don't they have to certify that when they procure it, that the funding's available? Anyways, all right, I appreciate your answer, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Dueñas. On DOE.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to ask a general question associated with pretty much every chapter we've been going through. And the answer on increases on appropriations consistently has been the discussion on the pay raises. Steve, my understanding was when this budget was submitted, and I'm just trying to get clarity, I'm not arguing the point, but when the budget was submitted, each and every one of these agencies already had it built into the request for the pay raises. Was that correct?
Senator, not all the departments with that. I believe most of the line agencies did, because I believe that was the instructions by the administration to include it, but not all agencies reflected that the GPP.
Yeah, because I remember when the governor was here announcing the pay raises and the pay plan, that the appropriation that we had gone through in February to do that was for only half of the fiscal year to take care of the balance, because her budget that she was going to be requesting was going to take into consideration I'm just trying to figure this out. So this might be an exercise just because I want to understand it I don't need this number off the bat, but can we please do this, because I think this is going to be important. Of the $99 million additional requests, how much of that is actually to handle the implementation of pay raises as opposed to what was already part of the baseline request that was asked for the governor's budget when the submittal took place in January? Like I said, I don't need we can come back to it in another chapter, but I'm trying to break that out because, that's, yeah. Steve?
Of the 99, okay, of the 99 million increase over FY23, Senator, 40 million was set aside for the GPP. I can give you a breakdown of the remaining amount, which is around 60 million. I can do that. But for the GPP alone was 40 million.
Okay. That's why I was a little bit perplexed on this cost factor of the 45. I knew it was going to be much higher than that. So we'd probably be looking year over year for the 22% was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 60 million for a full fiscal year.
If you're taking the GPP in totality for what the total impact was, it's going to be roughly about 40 million, because that's what we're budgeting this year. So yeah, we're funding the full 22% in FY24. So I don't think it's gonna increase. The only increase you see associated to that is like the increments and promotions and stuff like that, because it also adjusts the pay grades within the pay scale of Guam.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I asked this because I was struggling to find, the corresponding from the 99. I was going agency by request, and I was seeing that there has been, modest to, depending on the individual and what they believe in terms of increases, but I wasn't seeing the 99 in terms of on top of the request in terms of agency by agency. So I guess I've answered that for myself now, that a significant portion of that 99 million is actually to true up the impact of the 22%. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to comment on page 57 to 61? DOA. There being none, that section is now closed. We will take a short recess because there is an amendment before I open page 62 and we'll start that. So we'll take a recess at this time. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. We are now, my colleagues, on Chapter 5 up to page 61 is closed. We will now go to page 62, which is DRT, and there's only one amendment proffered by Senator Paris, and I'd ask her to go ahead and read her amendment.
So this is Masi, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity and for allowing me the time to make the necessary changes. So what this amendment says, it's basically to add a new subsection to subsection H, section 1, chapter 5 of the bill to read, for all funds appropriated for fiscal year 2023 and prior fiscal years to the Guam Department of Revenue and Taxation that were not expended or allotted in fiscal year 2023 shall not lapse and shall be available until fully expended. Such funds carried over super are to be expended for personnel salaries and benefits, contractual services, professional development and training for the support and implementation of the mandates of the compliance branch and examination branch, including but not limited to the implementation of tobacco stamp mandates, the procurement of tobacco stamps pursuant to 11 GCA Chapter 6, Article 8, and to hire a program coordinator to evaluate and manage staffing, position development, position description questionnaire or PDQs, and classifications administered by DRT for fiscal year 2024 and the required personnel pursuant to the merit system. So it's quite clear. So first of all, there are lapse funds available, and in looking at DRT's budget, it's quite clear that they're very thin in regards to funded positions in the compliance branch, and as well as there's gaps in personnel for the examination branch. And so these two branches are particularly essential for making sure that there is a decrease or to minimize the tax leakages. And so everyone is aware of that there's a public audit that was done regarding that, in fact. And so just to give you a little bit of the excerpts from this, from one of the public the audits. So in 2021, the Office of Inspector General assessed that there were 1,414 million taxes owed to the government of Guam in 2014 alone. In the audit, OPA estimated at least 22 million in tax leakages were present based on the available data that auditors managed to examine. So that's probably the minimum amount of tax leakage for the military contractors. Additionally, OPA found that 6 contractors, which have $90 million worth of defense contracts for the period from October 2015 to 2024, did not file taxes for 2016 to 2020 tax years and did not have a Guam business license. Additionally, for exemptions claim, OPA found that certain federal contractors did not have the documents to verify eligibility for tax exemptions. So, quote, the claim exemption significantly reduced contractors' taxable gross receipts, reducing their tax liabilities. For the 6 contractors alone, questionable exemptions totaled over $10 million. And so the importance of this amendment is to boost the capacity within DRT to ensure that the taxes are collected that are owed to the government. And then in regards to the compliance branch, so they are responsible for ensuring the implementation of tobacco stamps. And so as we heard during the public hearing, there was no money itemized for the implementation, the purchase of stamps, or the implementation of this program. And so it's essential that any kind of lapse funds that are available are used expeditiously and wisely for these efforts. The other thing here that's listed as an important point to fund is a program coordinator. And what this would do is this position shall evaluate and manage staffing, update the PDQs and classification. So this is really critically important because, as you know, DRT has a lot of LTAs, which needs to be addressed, and especially that it's important to hire qualified personnel pursuant to the merit system. So this ensures that the people that are being brought on to DRT have the needed qualifications to carry out the very important mandates of what DRT is tasked to do. And I believe this position is critical to right-sizing DRT as far as what is needed to accomplish these mandates. So I ask for my colleagues' support. Senator Masi.
Thank you. Anyone like to comment? I saw Senator Blas and Senator Tello's hands. Senator Blas, and also after Senator Tello be Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, Mr. Chair, question that I would have to the author would yield with respect to lapses. How much are we talking about in lapses here?
Senator Perez, do you yield to the question?
Sure. So I did ask this question of OFB, and as of today, there's 300,000 plus. Over 300,000. So this is a significant amount because considering when the discussion was had about tobacco taxes, to do a program in-house, it was estimated to be about 300,000. So of course, there has been an RFP that has been released already at this point. So we're waiting to see if there's any vendors that have applied.
So with that, Mr. Chair, I mean, if there's 300,000, and I'm looking at all the other things that that this $300,000 is going to be used for, 2 words, tinaw. 2 words, tinaw. Okay.
Anything else, Senator Blas?
Well, you know, and I understand the need, the desire to be able to provide them the resources. Mr. Guerrero, there seemed to be some confusion with regards to how the lapses and where the money comes from for the lapses. Can you please explain to the body, when we say lapses, what does that actually mean when you want to carry the money over to the next fiscal year? What money are we carrying over, and how does it affect the budget?
Mr. Guerrero.
Yes, Senator. When we use the word lapses, at least for budgetary purposes, lapses is normally realized when you take your total appropriation, you subtract it from your total expenditure, and if you have a positive balance and expenditure encumbrances, and when you have a positive balance, it's what we call an available balance. Some people use the word lapses. At the end of the fiscal year, you take that same report, and then you look at the balance at the end of the fiscal year, and you says, okay, they ended up with a positive $100,000. Again, if it's at the end of the fiscal year, again, I would caution, we still need to go through the audit. There's adjustments to be made post-closing and everything else. But at the end of the audit, when you finally figure out exactly how much money the department realized in true available balance, and I don't like to use the word lapses, that money then becomes available to be used for either other purposes or reverts back to the general fund. So again, lapses are just a term that we use just to identify unspent money based upon appropriation versus expenditures and encumbrance over a period of time.
So, with that explanation, then, is it safe to say that while you would like to be able to have the money, sometimes the money won't be there?
You can say that, Senator, but then again, if you really think about it, when agencies are are lapsing. I use the word lapse again because it's common for everybody. It's just an indication that the agency, departments and agencies didn't have the opportunity to utilize the appropriations made for that fiscal year. And there could be numerous reasons why that happened. But again, those appropriations are made to cover the expenditures for that period. We go through the budget cycle again the next fiscal year, and we appropriate money to cover expenses for the next 12 months. Now, if they're not spending, or there is a balance after one fiscal year, then it's an indication that a couple of things. One is that they don't need the money. You can assume that. Two, they didn't get the opportunity to spend it for whatever reason. and you know, you just kind of wonder, like, wow. And in my discussions with some of the departments and agencies, we're talking about lapses of multiple years. We're not talking about just the previous years. Some of these agencies are coming to me and says, "Oh, Mr. Guerrero, can we get the authority for multiple prior years?" And I'm saying, "Gee, how could you guys have prior year lapses? Why aren't you guys spending it?" So, you know, and this is another thing that, for budget purposes, many people have come up to me and said, "Steve, do you consider lapses as part of your determination on how you come up with the current next year's appropriation?" I would love to do that. And what we do is we actually go back, like for the 24 budget, we go back and we actually analyze the FY23 and we look at their expenditure rate. And if they're only expending at a certain level, then it's safe to say that that's the level, of course, with organic growth and adjustments and stuff like that, that you can expect the next fiscal year. And you know, barring all the reasons why they can't fill positions, you know, why their vacancies are still rolling over year after year after year, you got to stop and think in point of time, like, if these vacancies have been there for the last 3, 4, 5 years, why do we keep appropriating money for these positions? I always recommend the departments and agencies to utilize, reassess, go back and reassess your vacancies and determine, of all, say, 20, 30 vacancies, sometimes hundreds of vacancies, what are realistic positions you can fill? And those that have been vacant for 5, 6 years, 7 years, and I understand there's some that are critical, some that are difficult just by the nature of the positions. But I highly recommend that you go back and reassess, take some of that personal money cost out, and put it in operation where it's critical, where it is happening operations. And that's how you can basically maximize your appropriation. But I'm not a fan of carryovers, simply because, you know, if you didn't spend it, it's a good indication to me that, I won't say you don't need it, but you're just not spending it in a proper time that it's appropriated for, because the next year you're being appropriated money, not so much for the same thing, but maybe to continue it. And if we keep allowing the carryovers, all it does with the agencies is like, okay, well, I won't use my current year appropriations, I'll use my carryovers, and then all of a sudden you're lapsing again in the current year. And it's a repeated cycle. You're seeing it happening every year with these agencies. So it makes me wonder every once in a while, like, gee, are we appropriating too much to these agencies because they're not spending it in a timely manner? And you know, they keep asking me, that's just my logic. And I'll tell you, if I was supposed to consider the lapses of these agencies going forward, a lot of these agencies will see a reduction in their appropriation level the next year, because I'm going to consider all these lapses from prior years.
Thank you. But you also bring up a good point there, Mr. Guerrero. I think we should, because, you know, as this amendment reads, all funds appropriated for fiscal year 2023 and prior fiscal years. prior fiscal years. How long does an account, how long does money stay in account that we can say prior fiscal years?
For record purposes, Senator, it stays in the account.
Okay, so that for record purposes, the paper shows that it's there, but the cash.
Absolutely, you're correct.
So, you know, while we can say that there could be an argument made for this fiscal year, okay, and a carryover, but when you talk about prior fiscal years, if Department of Revenue and Tax showed for fiscal year 2012 that they had, you know, $2 million, you know, they shouldn't then think that there is $2 million in that account and it stays there. It's no longer there. I'm just very concerned of and you see this numerous times and prior fiscal years in an attempt to carry over or basically to utilize lapsed funds, is whether or not there is money behind, you know, that nomenclature, prior fiscal years. So in this case, if the discussion is here that they're only looking at about $300,000, that's it. I mean, I just don't want us to be beholden to a conversation where they pull up fiscal year 2021 and they show that they had a lapse of another $300,000, that they can expect $600,000 because the money's not there. Am I correct?
In theory, Senator, yes, you are correct.
Well, in theory, but you know, there's nothing theoretical about if there's no cash in the account, there's no cash. Right?
You're correct, Senator. Again, like I said, appropriations made by any legislature is an authority to spend money. And
but then, see, Steve, this gets to my point, is if in 2021 they said they had about, let's say, $100,000, okay? And based on this authorization, then it's going to be $300,000 plus $100,000, that's $400,000. There may be the existence of the $300,000 because this fiscal year hasn't been done, but 2021 should have been closed out. Where then will that $100,000 come from to be able to meet that?
Normally, Senator, at the end of the year, whatever monies is not spent is kept in the general fund. And when you're given the authority to use prior years, in most cases, again, that prior year appropriations is strictly authority. And you're just allowing them to spend money that you gave authority to last year, the year before, 3 years ago. You're giving them authority now to spend this year. But you're absolutely right. You can have the authority to spend. But if there's no cash to spend that, then it's very difficult for at least an administration to recognize that carryover.
Okay, because it goes back to that old Chamorro adage, I must have money in my account because I still have checks in my checkbook. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Tello, and you'll be followed by Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, Steve, it's conflicting what you told me earlier about lapsed funds. We can't tell. Well, we can first tell how much lapsed funds at the end of a fiscal year, maybe a month after the end of a fiscal year. We can tell how much lapses are in there, correct?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, and then the next question I asked you is, how do we know what they spent it on? And you told me that we can't tell what they spend it on. There's no requirement to tell us. So they could have it sitting there for 2 years, and we would never know if they spent it or not. And that's what you told me. Now you're...
Okay, Senator, let me clear something.
Okay.
When we talk about lapsed monies, those are monies kept in an account unspent. I can't tell you what they spent lapsed monies on because it's not spent. The only time you can start recording the expenses or figuring out what they spend it on is when they start spending those lapses.
Right, and then
Yes.
you also mentioned you can't tell what monies they used, whether it's lapse funds, because we authorize them to utilize lapse funds. Any carryovers, can be utilized, right? But you can't say, was it lapse funds or was it that year's budget that we appropriated, how they spent that money?
Senator, okay, I want to clarify this. Lapse funds are funds normally from a previous year, okay? Those lapse funds are kept in an account, a specific account, normally the prior year. If you authorize it to be spent this year, they're going to change the alpha, which is an annual alpha in that account number, to C, which is a continuing account. You can track the expenditures charged to that account. You can also track the expenditures made to any annual appropriation.
So now you're saying we can actually track?
If they charge the account, yes.
If they charge it, yeah, okay, so let's say an agency had $1 million in lapses.
Yes.
Right? Okay, and then the next fiscal year, they're given the authority to utilize lapse funds, and it was $1 million. If they spent $500,000 on repairs to something, right? Or if you can actually see in the AS400 or whatever, reports that you get, you can see that they spent it already, correct?
If they charge the proper account, yes.
If they charge the proper account.
Yes.
Okay.
If they charge a continuing account, which is the authorization to continue the lapse, then yes, you can monitor it. You can identify the expenditures.
Okay, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I have an amendment that actually would cover any kind of expenditures with lapses to identify it and provide it to the legislature. You and I went over this amendment to capture that information. I mean, why would I put in an amendment when you guys can already see what they spent on lapses?
I believe, Senator, your intent was to track the expenses of lapse funds. And
Right.
you are correct. If you want them to do that, they can do that. Because I think the reports that they submit to us now, like the CER report, does not include lapse funds. It only includes annual appropriations. But you asked me whether or not we can do this so you can track
What they're spending
what
on
they're spending
of their
lapse
lapse
funds. Yes.
Right, to identify it.
Yes, so that's
Okay.
why I agreed
Now,
that your provision was correct.
So we might not be able to check out FY21's lapse funds because we didn't have this reporting. But according to you, when your explanation, you're saying that you can look at an account that's lettered C to actually look at what they expended. So can you tell me, in FY21, can you find out if any lapse funds were spent? So that kind of gives you a gauge on how much is left over then, if you're looking at that account that says C. So what's in 2021?
If the appropriation was granted a carryover
Right.
authorization, and the department are utilizing those account numbers for their expenses, then I'm sure somewhere in the system we can track that. Yes, we can do that.
So you can actually tell how many lapses right now today, what's left over from the lapses in 2021. lapses.
Whatever is showing the AS400, to my knowledge, we can
Okay,
for
so
those
you can tell.
appropriations, if they're still in the system.
You know, Mr. Chair, I would like OFB to look into the account to find out what the lapses were in 2021, because this language says prior year. So if we get a true reality of it, I mean, my amendment, I have no problem with this amendment because you're using lapse funds to pay for it, not excess revenue, but lapse funds. So I have no problem. And like I said, I have an amendment that I'm going to proffer to track these expenditures with lapse funds. But I'd like to know from OFB, how much does Rev and Tax have in lapse funds for 2021 that has not been expended?
Senator, That will take work on our part. We would have to go into hundreds of accounts by departments to determine that. And that's what I'm saying.
Hundreds
So when
of
these amendments are brought up, when
thought it
these
was an
amendments are
account.
brought up, and you want to authorize a continuing appropriation that was done 3 years ago, I literally need to go back 3 years into the department, which departments have, DOE has hundreds of accounts. And we need to check every single one of the accounts, what the available balance is, and to see whether or not that particular appropriation fits the bill of the proposed legislation. It is possible to do it, but I would need time to do that.
Okay. Then my next question is the legislation that was passed by law, which is now, Chapter 6, Article 8 of Guam Code Annotated 11, to hire these program coordinating evaluation. Did Rev and Tax request for any funding for this?
Can you repeat the question, Senator? I'm sorry.
Okay. The law that's stated in here, 11 Guam Code Annotated, Chapter 6, Article 8, did Rev and Tax ask you to fund these positions?
Give me a moment, Senator.
No worries. You know what, if you're still looking, can I ask the author of the legislation, since she's the oversight chair of Rev and Tax, if Rev and Tax requested for this
Of
for
the
the budget?
amendment.
Is
Okay,
it okay?
You're
Yes.
referring to the amendment.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, ask the question, then I'll ask her if she used the
Sure.
question.
The question is, did Rev and Tax request OFB or request the office to include this in their budget, these positions?
Senator Perez, do you yield to the question?
Yes, I yield to the question, and so the answer is no.
They didn't
And,
ask.
But the thing is, this position is, I believe, critical because it would help to address a lot of the staffing concerns within the Department of Revenue and Taxation. So some of the issues that we're facing is there's a glut of LTAs, and the question is whether they have the qualifications to carry out some of the detailed tasks that they are doing. The other thing, so LTAs also, there's an issue with LTAs that have been continuing to be LTAs for many, many years. And so some of them do have the qualifications, but still remain as an LTA. So there's really, I believe there's an important, and the other thing is successional planning. So it's really critical that there's, currently now there's a exodus of staffing from DRT, and there's even critical shortages within certain departments. So like, for instance, the compliance branch, there's unfunded vacancies. And as we all know, there's a big issue with enforcement and compliance with many of the mandates. And so to overlook that shortage is something that needs, we cannot do any longer, and it needs to be addressed. So it's really about making sure government is functional, it's accountable, and it's doing what, we are expecting from them, and we want to make sure that they have the resources. So again, the program coordinator is going to assist in-house to oversee all of this, to make sure that those position descriptions are updated, the qualifications are updated, so the capacity, we can build capacity from within and ensure there's successional planning within the agency to ensure better service to our community. So short answer was no, but it's definitely needed.
Thank you. Senator Tello.
Thank you so much. Did OFB have something to add?
Yes, Senator. This particular position, they did not request in the budget.
Okay, so the legislation was passed and it was not funded. I know that we've been working toward, getting this tobacco tax stamp that was needed, and they have yet to do it. It sounds to me like an unfunded mandate when we first introduced it, but I'm glad to know they decide to keep it in-house instead of hiring a third party to oversee something like this. I mean, the regulations and requirements, it was proven that, certain powers should stay within the Department of Rev and Tax when it comes to these regulations or guidelines. So I appreciate the answers to my questions, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I certainly appreciate some of the comments from our earlier colleagues here on this, because I also wanted clarification, because as we've gone through the budget process last year and this year in the hearing, the department obviously has an awful lot of LTAs, and I did question the director, as to the purpose of these LTAs and the length of time of service, because the law is very specific. I mean, LTAs are not allowed to continue year after year. They have a limit of 1 year. And they also have to be required to qualify for the position to begin with. So I'm a little concerned about the large number of LTAs that are there. But I wanted to ask the sponsor of this amendment, because for us to have to create a position, hire a program coordinator, even that title in the government of Guam raises question marks all over my mind here. Why is this needed? Isn't this something that the director should be properly managing with regards to their personnel? Why do we need to add this on for this position, and why does it specifically have to be a program coordinator to do so? If the sponsor of the amendment would yield, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Perez, will you yield to the question?
Yes, I do yield. So I just recently had a meeting during lunchtime, and this was one of the recommendations to address the inequities within the department. And so this is coming from a person who is experienced. And, I've been trying to figure out ways to I guess, clean house with a DRT, and making sure that, I've approached it many different ways in regards to training, even I had a bill, I think, in the 35th to hire performance management contractor to review, the staffing of DRT, in addition to questioning about other grants that the government received in regards to evaluating the personnel and the personnel needs of DRT. So this is something that I've, been very consistent with. And so when this other opportunity came along, it seemed like an option that I'm willing to try, amidst all these other strategies that I've been trying to do to ensure that DRT has the needed personnel. And again, so yeah, I trust the advice of this individual, and it seems like there is a way forward when this recommendation was made.
I appreciate the response. I mean, I understand the direction that the sponsor is going in, but to me this is problematic, and this comes from experience, again, having managed agencies. To create another position that's going to be hired here, if there are the deficiencies and the capabilities of DRT to manage their personnel, then there are obviously bigger problems there, and I don't know if this is something I would support going into the budget. I think we probably need to have a bigger, more open discussion with DRT and with the Oversight Committee with regards to what their issues are, but I don't necessarily know that putting a program coordinator, creating another position to deal with staffing issues in DRT is the solution, because I think we need to bring to light and hold the department to task, hold the director to task with regards to the operations of DRT, to insert and then assume from the outside in the legislature somehow we're going to be able to manage the department, manage their hiring, or how they're going about that process externally is really impossible. It's not our role to do that. But I understand her concern. I would like to also see those things addressed, but I don't necessarily know that putting another position, and again, title of program coordinator in the government of Guam, question marks in my mind. What do program coordinators really do? And this is just another created position to do what? So I have reservations with regards to that particular section of the amendment, but I do appreciate the sponsor responding to my question. I just don't necessarily know that this is going to be the appropriate solution to address the bigger if there are bigger underlying issues with regards to the staffing of Department of Revenue and Tax. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to comment.
You're very welcome, Senator Brown. Anybody else who would like to speak on the amendment? Oh, your point of information, Senator Perez?
Yeah, I was wondering at this time, can I amend my amendment, considering that response?
Stand by. Oh, we'll take a short recess. Okay. We're back from recess. Is anybody else would like to speak on the amendment? Okay, Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Yes, and thank you, Madam Chair. You know, for most of my colleagues here, and exactly like the last speaker said, she was in management, she was a director. And I worked at Revenue and Tax, the tax fiscal, and I was the chief compliance officer there. Number one, we need to understand that number one, the ASO at Revenue and Tax changed on the last quarter of FY22. So a lot of the things are still being worked out. And at the same time, the department and every department would love to have labs. But we also need to understand how we do the budget. That when you work with the budget, you start from scratch. And when you want to claim that you're going to use labs, the funds you spend is what you get first in the budget. Not the labs. The lab is hopefully there somewhere if there's time to spend. But we need to also understand that when we talk about LTAs, I was there for about 14 years. I remember, and it's not about this administration, because this administration is only 4 years, 5 years. The whole time I was there were LTAs from 2 different administrations. And they all stayed. And yes, you're right, they have to be vetted to qualify. But the question would be, what were they vetted for? I know for a fact they weren't vetted to be a compliance supervisor or an officer. They weren't vetted to be a collection or revenue agent. They weren't vetted for that. Because why? During the time I was there, I would always ask them, hey, did you apply for the job? It opened. And they said, yeah, but I don't qualify. So in other words, it wasn't for the position. Because many of them were moved around in the department. They would assist in driver's license, in real property tax, in the income tax, in all the different branches where they could assist. Many of them attended classes, training that deals in the operation of revenue and tax, which is collections and even in the accounting. But you know what? A lot of the things that happen in revenue and tax, they're managed the best they can. If they can get labs, great. Will they be able to spend it? Hope to God. Number 2, we need to understand at the end of the year when they do the budget, when we complete this budget season and they go into the audit takes a look at all the money that's there. And then remember, we've always discussed this before, folks, my colleagues. Shortage in special fund. Where do you think it's coming from? It's coming from the general fund that pays it off. Hopefully catches it up so that it's not a shortage. And hopefully they do that. And remember, at the same time, in the very beginning when I first took over appropriation, we were always trying to figure out how we can use some of that money. But there's a law that says used for tax refund, used to pay vendors prior year and all that stuff. And the governor has been doing that. That's why we don't have a deficit, so to speak. Okay, I'm not going to say we don't because I don't know. I have to look at the books again. But when we're dealing with this amendment, being a prior revenue tax, I can support it for a certain extent, but program coordinator, I'm not comfortable. You know what a program coordinator is? If many of you don't understand what they are, they're the guys that are supposed to, or girl or lady, whichever sex it is supposed to go after grants. They're supposed to be the writer applying for grants. They're not the people that manage in the agency. They write the grants and they follow, make sure, and advise the supervisors, administrators, how the grants are to be applied. That's how that works. And then as you move along, position description questionnaire. When I was there, we had to update our job description. Each branch there had to sit down and we would rewrite our job description to update it so that it'll show what the current system is. And I know that revenue tax has been going through that quite often. So just, looking at all this, professional development, they do this internally. I know this because I worked there. And I had to go through that every year. There was always training going on. And at some point in 23, it kind of slowed down because why? We had all the requirements from the pandemic to the typhoon now. And with that, I don't know how we're going to use 300,000 is so critical. 200,000 is so critical. I would say, revenue tax, you got your budget, use your budget. Do what you can. Go after the tobacco. Go after the leases of the contracts, and then move on from there. Then we figure out a way how to identify a bill and address that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Augustine. Senator Barnett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I stand in full support of this amendment. It's a great amendment. Also, great suggestions of use of these lapsed funds. I just think it's funny. I don't want to bring up my point from earlier. As when we're talking about $300,000 in lapsed funds right now, but earlier we were talking about $1.9 million in lapsed funds, and nobody asked this many questions. So I just again want to go back to the preferential treatment, and if it's good for one branch agency, then it should be good for every other one. And I know I don't need to remind my colleagues in this body that revenue tax and it's a crucial part of our revenue collection. And if they have funds left over that they didn't spend, then they should be able to use them. I commend the author for introducing this amendment. And I like the idea of keeping the lapsage, with the other branch, it was quite a significant amount of money, and I felt it would be better used for the Guam Department of Education. But in this case, I can see the definite need for this agency to hang on to the money. And I just again want to state for the record that I think it's interesting that we're raising hell over $300,000, but we were totally willing to lay down for $1.9 million. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome, Senator Barnett. At this time, it's I can't see it from here, so 4:40, and we are going to recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.